I recently accepted a position as a one-day-a-week school counselor in Prince William County, so I'll stay in my position as an associate professor and go back into the schools, because I do really, and elementary school particularly, because I do feel like the prevention work that we can do with small children is so important. I also never wanted to be a counselor educator who said, 10 years ago when I was a school counselor, and this year will be my 9th year at Mason, so I thought I better get back on it. So Shekila and I work a lot together, doing presentations about youth mental health. We both feel really strongly about youth mental health, and there's a lot of pretty easy things that we can do to support children and their families, irrespective of the challenging things that they've overcome. Shekila talked a little earlier about resiliency, and we'll touch on that, but we want to acknowledge in the work that you're doing every day how challenging it can be to work with incarcerated individuals and their families, and the burnout, the compassion fatigue, and the vicarious trauma that we can experience as helpers. I'm finishing up teaching a summer class this summer. It's a new class for new students, so they're brand new. I call them shiny pennies. And we did a case that was sent to me by my malpractice insurance company, sent out a case with it, which they do often, and said, here's a way to learn as a practitioner, right? You know how they do that. So I thought, oh, this is great. It's the last night of the semester. This is exactly everything we've learned about. And it was about a case with a client who had died by suicide. And we were going through everything that they had learned. I always feel good when they learn something, you know. And one of my students, and so kind of going through, and I'm like, okay, great, they learned something, we spent time. And one of my students raised her hand and said, at some point in the program, will you all teach us how to manage it when when a client dies by suicide? Will you teach us how to deal with that? And honestly, my response was, I felt, you feel it in your gut, I thought, well, we'll talk about it.
This Reform Alliance group, and it was the first time that we did a book club, and it was very successful. The book we read was What Happened to You. It was such a great book. Has anybody else read it? It's one of those, it's not fun, right, to read, so you have to read some and then stop and think about it, process it, figure out how it relates to you and others. Was there anything else about
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the book, they kind of advise you to take it in bits and pieces, take it at your own pace, kind of dose it so that it doesn't overwhelm you, because there is a lot of trauma stories in there and you may relate to a lot of it, but it really helps to understand why people may be the way they are, or why you may be the way you are, and it really helps release a lot of the guilt and shame that sometimes we hold on to based on some of the things that we've experienced. And so if you have a better understanding, and this touches on it a little bit too, but it really goes in more depth about how our brains have developed and how that affects our behaviors and all kinds of good things. So definitely a book we would recommend reading, or if you even have friends to read it with to help you process it, could be good.
So we'll share that book name, and then there's some others that we know of as well, so we'll share that out as well. Again, just like Angela was saying, the subject matter with the book, but also with what we're covering today, can be sensitive. So if anybody needs to step out, if we could just ask that you use the thumbs method. So thumbs up if you have to go out and you're okay. Thumbs down if you need one of us to come out and just check with you and make sure you're okay. That way, like I said, we know this is sensitive information. And the clipboard's going around, that's a sign-in sheet, so that way we can get your name and your email and send you resource information later. All right, so we are gonna go ahead and start by talking about neuroscience, epigenetics, adverse childhood experiences, and resilience. So, and before I go to that real quick, I forgot to mention, I want to thank you guys for coming in to learn more about ACEs, because this is going to help hopefully put another tool in your toolbox, so that way when we're working with each other, when we're working with coworkers, with children, with members of the community, it just gives you something else, a better understanding, so that way together we can reduce the number of adverse childhood experiences. So I wanted to just mention that.
I'm Philip Lewis. Sorry, I'm kind of scatterbrained. So I've changed the slides a little bit. I've heard that you're coming to hear about working with those who have incarcerated parents or families that have incarceration, but I'm an advocate by heart, so every time I look at my slides or think about something, I think of another idea or concept or research topic or proposal. So this has adjusted a bit. So the primary focus is still going to be working with those who have been impacted by incarceration. But the goal is to aid in some advocacy for to decreasing recidivism and stopping intergenerational incarceration. So that's going to be the crux of most of our conversation today. Before we start, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a social worker by trade and also a lawyer. I no longer practice, but for a bit I did do criminal law and international law. I had to stop because I'm also in the military, and my military service sometimes is too disruptive to have long-term cases or be following clients while practicing law at the same time. My career, incidentally or funny enough, I guess, started with working with the Children of Inmates program. I had no choice during my graduate program. Then I started doing criminal defense, and then somehow I got roped into the Barbara Jordan Research Institute to research recidivism. Then I happenstance to be serving with someone in the military who was a judge. They were on the JAG side. I was doing mental health at a clinic in Japan, completely across the world, right? And he's like, oh, when I go back to Texas, I'll be doing A, B, and C. I'm here at this court, you know, and criminal court, blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, I'm also a lawyer, 1, 2, and 3. And then he said, well, I need you to come up with a policy of how we can consider kids when sentencing, because we were having this conversation. So just naturally, this kind of topic has always followed me throughout my career. I'm also a child of incarcerated parent, so I also see that side of the aspect as well, and know how reintegration and all of those things can impact those we're working with. I'm very informal. So I'll be stopping and writing notes when I think of something or see something or hear something. So at any time, if you have a question or a thought, please stop, interrupt me, because if we don't, I might ramble and then run out of time, and then you won't have time for your Q&As. So I won't feel disrespected or anything. If you have something, raise your hand or just interrupt if you see the time is appropriate. So just to...
Right? But what do we do as human beings? We imagine the worst case scenario, we go to that, and that becomes a thing that our brain just gets wrapped around, and we get stressed from that. So as you go through life, when you start to feel anxious and you're catastrophizing, one of the things you can ask yourself is, how true is that? How real is that, right? That might give you a different outlook on life. So I took these from the APA online dictionary. So a little bit of the language is kind of academic, but the idea really is to understand that it's the anticipation of impending danger or a threat, okay? And then stress, it's physiological, it can be psychological, right? And when you experience it, almost every system in your body is going to be affected by stress. And we'll talk more about that in detail as I go through this. But when you're experiencing stress, it's going to affect how you feel about yourself, about other people, and it's also going to affect the way you behave or respond to other people, okay? So if you think about that, if I'm driving along and all of a sudden I see some driver in front of me with their phone in their ear, a McDonald's burger, and they're kind of doing this with their knee and stuff, and they cut me off, right? No one's ever seen that happen before. I probably don't have the nicest things to think about that person, right? So I'm immediately stressed because that person almost caused an accident. And now I just feel this sense of, I need revenge. Why? Why, right? That person's probably got their own stresses, their own problems, and I can create distance and separation and try not to be around that person and hope they go on with the rest of their day.
It's just an abstract of a white piece of paper and black crayons. And the black crayon was just a scribble, just didn't draw, didn't color in the lines or anything. It was nothing but her emotions. That's all it was, how she was feeling. And so I left that day realizing that something was very strange about what my daughter was going through. It was academic experience. And I recall some research that I did in my Introduction to Psychology course. Jean Piaget, cognitive development theorist, who says that children learn because somebody wants them to. And then I realized that my daughter was not learning at her capability, level of capability, because she didn't perceive that anybody cared about her. And so I contacted the teacher and I said, no, I don't give you permission to take my child out of school and put her in preschool. She's ready, she's cognitively ready. But I'll tell you what I will do, I'm gonna volunteer my time. And so I went to my daughter's classroom every day and I told the teacher, first thing, give her a desk. The next thing I did, I would walk the room, modeling for the teacher how to share her love and warmth, not just to the children that look like her, but also the children, the child that looked like me. So I rubbed Shanita's back, I tapped her, I went to the kid that was sitting next to her, I tapped her, and gave her information, said, oh, that's very good. Validating. My little girl would look up at me and smile. At the end of that grading period, the teacher came to me and says, oh, we just experienced a miracle. What's your daughter? We just experienced a miracle. How did she do that? Did you tutor her at home? You didn't have to tutor her at home. She had the things, the concepts that you were teaching her, she had them in preschool, you know? All I did was validated her existence to let her know that I cared about her learning and that she was capable of learning. So today, in this short time that we have together, I would just like to share with you some basic things about the research, but also integrate that with my worldview and also my practice.
So I'm a teacher, I'll just preface with that, and that's why you see that I have my objectives on the board, because we are trained to always have our objectives on the board. All right, but today I'm going to try to kind of define culturally responsive or culturally sensitive and trauma responsive care in schools. It does look a little bit differently for the school system because as teachers, you know, we aren't trained as professionals. We just kind of have to take what we're given and see how we can incorporate that into our teaching practices. We are going to take a look at some data and information and some charts that are helpful in recognizing trauma symptoms and how they get misinterpreted in schools, especially with students of color. And then I have some concrete strategies that we can use to disrupt punitive school practices or even disrupt our thinking about those behaviors and help to build support. And so we'll do a few of those together today. Hopefully I'll have time where we can play along with each other. That's me. I'm Monica. I've been in education for over a decade, almost 2 decades now. I'm an English teacher, curriculum developer, lead equity facilitator, assistant director of professional learning, ACES trainer. All these things I have done at different points in my life. I did reach a point where I was in a session today earlier. I did reach burnout. I had left my assistant director of professional learning position because I had given up on education, the education system. I felt like this is broken. There's nothing I can do. You know, I felt if I just keep going higher and higher and higher, then I can make more change. And I was at the highest point. I was the assistant director of professional learning for every staff member in that county, and it still felt broken because we still have the barriers of systems. You know, you have a school board you answer to, you have funding problems, the federal government, all those things. So I reached burnout, and I said, that's it, I'm done with education, I'm leaving. As soon as I announced that I was leaving the school division that I was with, I was contacted by a lot of other people in education and some superintendents who said, well, can you please keep doing this part of the work that we like that you do. So I was like, fine, I'll do it, I'll do that because that's on my terms. And then I realized, okay, I'm still in education, and what did I really want? Like, why did I get into this? And it was because of the kids. So I'm back into teaching because that's what got me here, and that's what I like to do. And I know that that's my place, right? That's my purpose.
We've been, like, this is what I do in my home usually, if I'm doing a good job. This is what we've been doing at DSS. This is what we do. And this is just a word that's attached to my mindset and my philosophy and my theory in life anyway. So today,
I'll be your clicker till 1:55.
you're so awesome. Okay, so anyway, so I ended up here because I've been involved with FailSafe a lot. But I would like to know, first I'm gonna use a talking piece, because when I'm doing work, I use a talking piece. I'm gonna use tigers, no, I'm not. I'm gonna use the hearts. This is there's a little indent, so it's like one of those, like, ooh, I need to chill out. I'm just gonna rub on this. So, okay, what's that?
One of the fidget or word.
Yeah. So I'm gonna pass this, and I'm just gonna ask if you would say your name, what brought you here today, and if you were to pick one word, what is your purpose in life? One word, okay? So I'm Deb Cain. What brought me here today is just my journey through careers and recognizing that restorative practices is very important to me. It's my purpose. And if I were to say in one word what my purpose is, I would say healing. Do you mind? Mm-hmm. So name what brought you here in one word, purpose.
My name is Dana. I'm a former special education teacher, current law student, so just exploring all the things. In one word, let's go curiosity.
And thinking about, what our public schools could be, and how they could be places that meet the needs of our students and that pull them in instead of pushing them out. I think it is also important to acknowledge where we are and how we got here. The reality is that Virginia has never had great public schools for every student. That's not something Virginia's ever had. And what we have had throughout much of our history of public education over the last 150 years is a segregation of resources. So some schools are places where there's lots of enrichment activities, and there's parent volunteers in the classroom who can help and sit with a child who's struggling. And then there's other schools where they don't have all those resources. And that segregation of resources has been enabled by physical segregation of students, by race and by economic status, by and large. And we know from research that lack of resources also leads to a reliance sometimes on exclusionary discipline practices because the schools don't have the resources to engage in a more inclusive way children who are struggling. So going all the way back to sort of the birth of Virginia's system of public education in the late 1860s, after the end of the Civil War, you saw schools getting set up by and for free people to provide an education that had previously been denied by law in Virginia to enslaved and free Black folks. In 1869, the legislature acted to create for the first time a system of free public education, and that was done together by Black and white legislators. But unfortunately, they didn't find the funding to really fund that system of free public education. So in the late 1870s and early 1880s, we saw another sort of wave of energy around public education, and we